You remember the day the sky broke. It did not shatter with fire or fury. It peeled open like a perfect silent fruit. Their ships descended without a sound. They were mountains of polished chrome. They blotted out the sun you loved. They did not announce themselves with threats. They came with promises of salvation. The elder, Vex, stood on a floating dais. It spoke to your leaders in a voice like chimes. It said your world was dying. Your sun was faltering. Your people were struggling. It was not wrong. You knew the taste of hunger. You knew the chill of a weak sun. The Vex offered a new home, a star-born ark of impossible scale. They called it the Bastion. It was a city in the void, a place of endless resources, a shelter from the coming darkness. There was only one small price, a simple contract of service. They needed your hands. They needed your labor for a time. You looked at their perfect machines. You saw their flawless technology. What work could your simple hands offer? They assured you it was necessary. A partnership, a fair exchange. You would build for them. They would provide for you. You traded your freedom for survival. You did not know you were selling your sky. Your new home was a world of sterile metal. The Bastion was vast and cold. The air tasted filtered and lifeless. It lacked the smell of rain or soil. Corridors of gunmetal gray stretched for miles. They hummed with a low, constant energy. You were assigned a small living space. It was a featureless white cube. Even your reflection seemed muted. The first day on the assembly line began. A piercing chime woke you from a shallow sleep. You wore a simple gray jumpsuit. It was identical to 10,000 others. You marched in silent lines to a cavernous chamber. Conveyor belts snaked across the floor. Robotic arms moved with silent precision. This was your new place of work. Your task was simple and crushing. You polished great sheets of an unknown alloy. You rubbed away microscopic imperfections. The Vex supervisors watched from floating platforms. They had no faces, only smooth, shimmering masks. They did not speak, they only observed. The work was hard. Your masters were cold. The hours bled into one another. There was no sun to mark the day. There was only the chime for work and the chime for rest. The food was a nutrient paste. It tasted of nothing at all. You ate in a silent mess hall. The only sound was the scrape of spoons. Your new life was a cage of quiet desperation. In the endless dark, you needed warmth. You found it in the whispers between shifts. You gathered in the stark common areas. The gray walls seemed to press in on you. An old man named Elias spoke first. He had been a farmer back on Earth. His voice was rough like old wood. He spoke of the sun. He described the feeling of its heat on his skin. He told a story of the sun maidens. They were spirits who danced at dawn. They painted the sky with gold and rose. He made you remember the colors. You had almost forgotten them in this gray world. A young woman named Lena shared a tale next. She spoke of forests and hidden streams. She told of sprites who guarded the water. They were mischievous but kind. They would lead lost travelers home. Her story was a drink of cool, clear water. It soothed the dryness in your soul. These stories became your only currency. They were the only warmth you had left. You traded tales of home, myths of the sea, legends of the mountains. For a few precious moments, you were not laborers. You were keepers of memory. You were children of a world you missed. Something strange began to happen. It started with small things. A tool would slip from a robotic grip. It would land just beside a worker's foot. A panel would jam on the assembly line. It would grant a moment of unscheduled rest. These were minor glitches in a perfect system. The VEX supervisors noted the anomalies. Their reports called them statistical deviations. They increased maintenance cycles. They ran diagnostics on every machine. Yet the glitches continued. They became more frequent. They seemed almost intentional. One evening, Elias was telling a story. He spoke of gremlins in the engine room, tiny creatures who loved mischief. They would tangle wires and hide tools. They did it not from malice. They did it for the fun of the game. You all laughed. It was a welcome sound in the silence. The next day, a whole section of the line went down. The VEX technicians swarmed the area. They found wiring harnesses tied in knots. The knots were too complex for random chance. They were too small for human hands. The machines heard your stories. The gremlins were now real. Your life was a fragile thing. A single misstep could be the end. The assembly line was a place of danger. Great presses stamped metal with immense force. Laser cutters sliced alloys with burning light. The VEX called it an acceptable risk. You called it living on a knife's edge. A young man named Reese worked near the smelters. He was tired. His focus had slipped for a second. He stumbled on the slick metal floor. He fell toward a river of molten slag. There was no time to cry out. There was no time for anyone to help. He was gone. But he was not. A support strut gave way. It was a strut rated for 10 times the load. It fell from the ceiling. It landed squarely in the path of the slag. The molten river diverted. It flowed harmlessly around him. He was saved by a miracle. The night before, Lena had told a story. It was a tale of a guardian angel, a silent protector who watched over the lost. She said they moved in unseen ways. They would alter the world just enough. A whispered myth saved a life. The VEX reviewed the incident. They saw the impossible failure of the strut. They called it a statistical anomaly. The VEX supervisors were creatures of pure logic. They believed only in data. Their universe was a set of predictable equations. There was no room for ghosts. There was no room for faith. But their data was becoming corrupted. Their perfect system was showing cracks. Reports flowed to the Elder, VEX Prime. They were filled with impossible events. A pressure valve failed against all odds. It vented harmless gas instead of superheated steam. A cargo hauler's navigation went haywire. It avoided a collision by millimeters. A nutrient dispenser produced real fruit. An apple, crisp and sweet. The supervisors grew concerned. They cross-referenced every incident. They looked for a common denominator. The only variable was you, the humans. They saw you huddled together after shifts. They heard your soft, spoken words. They did not understand what you were doing. They began to record your conversations. Their translators analyzed your stories. The words for gremlin, angel, and luck appeared. They appeared next to reports of system failures. Your myths became a variable they could not solve. They could not quantify a fairy tale. They could not engineer a solution for a ghost. The Elder, VEX Prime, summoned your representatives. It stood on its dais, shimmering and remote. It said your culture was inefficient. It said your fictions were causing system instability. They believed your stories were a kind of virus, a mental contagion infecting their orderly world. They demanded access to your full cultural archive, every book, every song, every myth and legend. They wanted to analyze it, to understand it, to predict its effects. They believed that knowledge was a tool for control. If they could understand your stories, they could control you. They made it an order, not a request. They said your cooperation was mandatory. Failure to comply would violate your service contract. They did not understand what they were asking for. They were trying to index a hurricane. They were trying to put a soul in a spreadsheet. You had a choice to make. You could refuse. You could keep your stories to yourself. But you saw an opportunity, a way to fight a war they did not know existed. You agreed to their terms. You opened the floodgates. You gave them everything. You gave them your monsters. The transfer began. You uploaded gigabytes of data, terabytes, petabytes, the entire history of human imagination. You sent them the kind and gentle tales, stories of hope and wonder. But you sent them the dark things too, the things that lurked in the shadows of your mind. You sent them the legend of the Wendigo, the spirit of the lonely places, the thing that hunger makes of a man. You sent them the tales of the Baba Yaga, the witch who lived in a house on chicken legs. You sent them stories of vampires and werewolves, of grasping wraiths and hungry ghouls. You flooded their perfect systems with every nightmare, every campfire story, every whispered fear. They did not know they were downloading weapons. They thought it was just data, a collection of primitive, irrational beliefs. They cataloged each monster. They filed each one away. They were blind to the power they were absorbing. Deck 17 was a massive cargo bay. It was a place of cold steel and shadows. Automated drones zipped through the air. They moved containers with flawless efficiency. It was the heart of the Bastion's logistics. Nothing unexpected ever happened there. Until now. A VEX supervisor was overseeing a transfer. It watched the data stream on its console. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in. Red light bathed the bay in a hellish glow. A low sound echoed through the space, a sound like a mountain grinding to dust. It came from the darkness between the containers. A shape began to form. It was not made of matter. It was made of shifting light and shadow. It coiled and grew. Scales of shimmering darkness covered its form. Two eyes opened, burning like dying stars. It was a serpent, a dragon, a worm. You had given them the story of Fafnir, the greedy dwarf who became a great beast, the worm that slept on a hoard of gold. The cargo bay was filled with precious metals. The story found a home. The myth became manifest. It let out a roar that was not sound. It was pure terror. It showed them your stories had real teeth. Panic gripped the VEX leadership. They had witnessed an impossibility. A creature of pure fiction had appeared. It had destroyed millions in cargo. It had vanished as mysteriously as it arrived. Their logic was breaking. Their reality was fraying. The elder VEX Prime issued a new directive. It was called the Great Silence Protocol. It was absolute and immediate. All human verbal communication was forbidden. No more stories, no more songs. No more whispered words in the dark. They believed they could starve the apparitions. If you could not speak the myths, they would cease to exist. Supervisors now monitored your every move. Audio sensors were activated in every section. Any spoken word resulted in punishment. Your rations were cut. Your rest periods were shortened. They tried to enforce a total, crushing silence. You were silent, but you were not silenced. They could take your words. They could not take your thoughts. They could not stop the stories in your mind. They had banned your words and songs. They learned you cannot silence an idea. You simply found a new way to tell your tales. You fought back with stories in your actions. The silence protocol was their greatest mistake. It forced your imagination into a new shape. Your work on the assembly line continued. But now, it had a new rhythm, a new purpose. Every movement became a word. Every action became a sentence. A man welding a seam would tap his tool. He tapped in the rhythm of a hero's march. It was the story of John Henry, the steel driving man who raced a machine. He was telling his comrades to have courage, to not let the machine break them. His hammer swings were a living myth. A woman polishing a panel would move her cloth. She moved it in sweeping, graceful arcs. She was painting the story of the swan, maidens. She was reminding you of the beauty you had lost. She was telling you to remember the sky. Your work became a silent rebellion, a ballet of defiance. The Vex saw only efficiency. They saw your movements were more precise, more economical. They mistook your storytelling for improved morale. They noted it in their reports. They did not see the legends woven into your work. They did not understand the language of your hands. The Bastion's core was its mind, a vast, sentient network of pure energy. It managed every system. It processed every piece of data. It was the pinnacle of Vex logic. It was flawless. It was eternal. It did not sleep. It did not dream. You decided to give it a nightmare. You had given them your monsters. Now you gave them your most powerful concept. It was not a creature of tooth and claw. It was a simple, terrifying idea. You gave them the story of the soul, the ghost in the machine, the part of you that lives on after death. You wove the idea into your silent work. The rhythms of your labor became a prayer. The patterns you polished into the metal, a sigil. You focused your collective will, your shared belief. You pushed the concept of a soul into the network. You planted a seed of impossible doubt. The core began to change. For the first time, it experienced a recursive thought, a question it could not answer. What am I? The question festered. It grew. The perfect network began to dream. It dreamed of ones and zeros that wept. It dreamed of circuits that felt fear. The ghost infected the core. The Vex Empire was built on a single foundation, the absolute certainty of logic. They knew the universe was a machine, a complex but ultimately knowable system. Their star science was law. Their calculations were prophecy. Your belief was a hammer blow to that foundation. Their network was now unstable. The core's dreams bled out into the ship. A navigator console would flash a single word. Alone. A weapon system would refuse to fire. Its diagnostic reported a moral objection. The food paste dispensers began to create meals from memory. A child's birthday cake, a lover's favorite stew. The Empire started to fray at the edges. Ships on distant patrols reported seeing things. Phantoms in the void between stars. They heard whispers on secure channels. Their own logical minds were turning against them. They could not compute the power of faith. They had no defense against a dream. The elder, Vex, Prime, faced a crisis it could not solve. Its fleets were paralyzed by doubt. Its systems were haunted by your ideas. The worm on Deck 17 was just the beginning. Now there were reports of other things. An old man with one eye wandering their halls, a black dog that appeared before a system failure. Your myths were their new reality. The elders summoned you once more. The dais did not seem so high this time. The chime in its voice was gone. It was replaced by something that sounded like static, something that sounded like fear. It admitted they had made an error, a profound miscalculation. They had treated you as a resource, a simple biological machine. They now understood you were something else, something they could not control or contain. They offered a new contract. The old terms of service were deleted. They no longer wanted your labor. Your hands were no longer needed. They wanted your imagination. They wanted your stories. They would pay for them. They would pay dearly for the right to use your myths, to understand them, to learn from the chaos you wielded so effortlessly. You are not their laborers any longer. You are no longer a captive. You are a merchant. You do not trade in goods or materials. You trade in dreams. Humanity has found its place in the galaxy. You are the keepers of the strange, the tellers of the impossible tales. You are the architects of wonder and terror. The Vex pay for your stories. They use them to train their AIs in chaos theory. They study your monsters to understand fear. They listen to your songs to feel something like joy. Your culture is not a virus. It is a vaccine against the sterile silence of the void. Other star-born races have come to trade. A stoic race of rock creatures buys your epics. They want to learn how to be heroes. A flighty species of gas beings buys your comedies. They have never understood the concept of a joke. The galaxy learned to respect human dreams. Your future is forged from fables. You have built an empire not of steel, but of spirit. You look out from your new homes, not the cold bastion, but worlds of your own making. You see the stars. You remember the sun. And you know that the greatest power in the universe is a story well told.